The day I collapse in the driveway, the first thing I remember is the cold. February in Sudbury does that. It gets into you before you even realize you've fallen. One moment I was scraping ice off the windshield of my truck. The next I was on my back looking up at a white sky. My left arm numb from shoulder to wrist, my chest feeling like someone had parked a truck on top of it. My neighbor from across the street, a retired postal worker named Gord, saw me go down. He's the one who called 911. He's the one who rode with me in the ambulance because, as he told the paramedic, someone should. My son-in-law was the one who called my daughter. She called me back 4 hours later. I want to be fair about who I am, because I think you need to understand me before you understand any of what happened. My name is Vincent. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as a site supervisor for a construction company out of Sudbury, Ontario. The kind of work where you're outside in -30 weather, pointing at frozen ground and trying to convince 20 men that the schedule still matters. I retired 4 years ago with a decent pension, a paid-off house on Lorne Street, and a bad hip I keep meaning to do something about. My wife Sandra passed from ovarian cancer 11 years ago. We had one child together, our daughter, who I will simply call my daughter, because that's how I always thought of her, not by name, just mine. She was 34 when this happened. She lived 40 minutes away in Hanmer with her husband and their 2 kids. We had dinner together maybe once a month, sometimes less. I told myself that was normal. People are busy. Kids are busy. I was busy too, I said. Even though retired men in Sudbury in February are not especially busy, I was just telling myself the story I needed to tell. They kept me in the cardiac unit at Health Sciences North for 6 days. The first night, Gord sat with me until 10 o'clock. He brought a Tim Hortons bag with 2 large doubles and a maple dip, and he sat in the chair beside my bed, and we watched the news together without saying much. When he left, he squeezed my arm and said, "I'll check in tomorrow." He did. Every day. My daughter came on day 3. She stayed for 45 minutes. I know because the parking in that hospital costs $4 for the first hour, and she mentioned twice that she'd have to move her car. She asked the right questions. What did the doctor say? Is it your heart? Do you need anything? But she asked them the way you fill out a form. Checking boxes. Her husband stayed home with the kids, which I understood. What I didn't understand was the look on her face when I asked if she could maybe come back the next day. She said she'd try. She didn't come back. What I didn't know yet, what I had no way of knowing from that hospital bed, was that while I was attached to monitors and being told I'd had a significant cardiac event and needed to seriously reconsider the pace of my life, my daughter and her husband were sitting at their kitchen table in Hanmer having a very different kind of conversation. About my house. About my pension. About whether I was, as her husband apparently put it, still really capable of living alone. I found all of this out later. I'll get to how. For now, let me tell you about day 4. A woman named Beverly came in to check my vitals around 7 in the morning. She'd been assigned to my room since day 150s. Sharp eyes, the kind of calm that you only get from decades of watching people at their worst and choosing to stay anyway. She noticed I hadn't touched my breakfast tray. She didn't lecture me about nutrition. She just sat on the edge of the other chair, the one that had been empty since my daughter left, and she said, "You doing okay?" I said I was fine. She said, "You don't look fine." And I don't know why. Maybe it was the 6 days of fluorescent lights, or the heart monitor beeping, or just the plain fact of that empty chair. But I told her the truth. I said my daughter had visited once in 4 days, and I wasn't sure she was coming back. I said my wife had been gone 11 years, and I still sometimes turned to say something to her in the morning. I said I was 68 years old, and I had apparently just had a heart attack in my own driveway, and the person who found me was my neighbor. Beverly listened to all of it. Then she said, "Do you have a lawyer?" I said yes, an old family lawyer in Sudbury I'd used for Sandra's estate. She said, "Call him." I didn't ask her why. I think I already knew. That afternoon I called Martin, my lawyer, from my hospital room. I told him what had happened. The cardiac event. The 6 days. The fact that my daughter had visited once and that her husband had been quietly asking around. I was now hearing through Gord about power of attorney. Martin listened, and then he asked me a question I won't forget. "Vincent, when did you last update your will?" I told him. Sandra had been alive. It had been almost 12 years. He said, "Let's fix that." We made an appointment for the week after my discharge. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a while. There's a particular feeling you get when you realize that the person you trusted most in the world has been sitting at a kitchen table 40 minutes away, measuring your house. I want to be clear. I had given my daughter every reason to think this was possible. Not on purpose, but I had spent 34 years being her father in a very specific way. The way where you say yes, where you absorb the inconveniences, where you tell yourself that love means you don't keep score. When her husband's transport business ran into trouble in 2019, I gave them $40,000. I told them it was a gift. I meant it as a gift. I don't think he ever thought of it as a gift. When they needed a new roof in 2021 and came up short, I covered the difference. $12,000. When the kids needed dental work their insurance didn't cover, when the van needed a transmission, when they wanted to take the family to Banff and couldn't quite swing it, I was there. Each time I told myself it was because I wanted to. Each time I told myself Sandra would have done the same. What I hadn't done was think about what I was teaching him about who I was and what I was for. The morning of day 5, Gord came in with his usual Tim Hortons and some news. He'd run into my son-in-law at the Canadian Tire on the Kingsway the day before. The man had asked Gord, casually, Gord said, too casually, whether I'd ever mentioned wanting to downsize, whether I'd talked about moving somewhere with less maintenance, whether Gord thought I was managing okay on my own. Gord told me this with a very flat expression, and then he said, I told him you were fine and that I was keeping an eye on things. I thanked him. He said, you should know what's happening around you is all. On day 6, they discharged me. Gord drove me home. My daughter called that evening to ask how I was feeling and to let me know that she and her husband wanted to come by that weekend to talk about next steps. She said it gently. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I said that was fine. We agreed on Sunday at 2. That gave me 3 days. I called Martin on Friday morning. We met at his office on Elm Street and spent 2 hours going over everything. I updated my will. I revised the beneficiary designations on my pension and my RRSPs. I did not remove my daughter entirely. She was still my daughter, and I still loved her, and I will carry that love to my grave regardless of what she did or didn't do. But I made changes, significant ones. I added Gord as executor. I set up a trust structure for my grandchildren, direct to them, not through their parents, with conditions on age and purpose of use. And I left Beverly a bequest, not a small one. She had sat in an empty chair and told me to call my lawyer. And sometimes that is the most valuable thing another person can ever do for you. I wanted her to know it mattered. Sunday came. My daughter arrived at 2 o'clock with her husband. I had the kettle on. I had a plate of shortbread on the counter that I hadn't bought for them but happened to have. I sat at the kitchen table, and I let them settle, and I waited. Her husband did most of the talking at first. He had clearly prepared. He used words like transition and quality of life and taking the stress off your plate. He mentioned that the real estate market in Sudbury had been strong, as if I hadn't lived here for 40 years and didn't know that. He said that if I were to sell the house, the equity combined with my pension would set me up very comfortably in a condo or retirement community. He said this with the particular confidence of a man who has already done the math on your behalf. My daughter watched her coffee cup. I let him finish. Then I said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. I looked at my daughter when I said it, not him. Did you come to the hospital to see me? Or did you come to see how bad it was? She looked up. She opened her mouth. She closed it again. I said, "You came once. You stayed 45 minutes. You mentioned the parking twice." I said it quietly. I wasn't angry. I had been angry, alone in that hospital room at 2 in the morning. But by Sunday, it had passed through anger into something colder and clearer. While I was in that hospital, your husband was asking my neighbor about whether I wanted to downsize. I want you to know that I know that. Her husband started to say something. I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "I told them I had met with Martin. I told them the will had been updated and the beneficiary designations had been changed. I told them that if I chose to sell my house, it would be because I decided to sell my house, and whatever I did with that money would be my decision and no one else's. I told them that the $40,000 from 2019 and the $12,000 from 2021 and every other amount I had given over the years had been given freely, and I did not want it back, but that the giving was over. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Then I said the thing I had been turning over for days. I said, "You are my daughter. You will always be my daughter. I am not cutting you out of my life, but I am telling you that what happened this month, me lying in a hospital for 6 days and you coming once, that is something I will not pretend didn't happen. And if you want a relationship with me going forward, it has to be built on something different than what we've been doing." She was crying by then. I don't know if it was guilt or grief or something else. I handed her a serviette, the plain white ones from the bulk pack at Costco, and I waited. Her husband was very quiet. After a while she said, "I didn't know what to do. When they called me and said you were in the hospital, I froze. I didn't know if you were dying. I didn't know if I could handle it. She stopped, shook her head. That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It's not. But I heard it. I kept it." Her husband apologized too, eventually. It was the kind of apology that starts with, "I'm sorry if," which is not really an apology at all, but I let it stand. There are limits to what you can accomplish in a Sunday afternoon. They left around 4:30. My daughter hugged me at the door for a long time. I hugged her back. After they drove away, I stood in the kitchen for a while. Gord had texted to ask how it went. I texted back, "Fine. Come over for a beer if you want." He was at my door in 10 minutes with a 6-pack of Molson Canadian, and we sat in the living room and watched the Leafs lose, which they did, dependably, the way they always do. It has been 7 months since that Sunday. My daughter calls me every week now. Not every week because I asked her to, every week because she decided to. Some weeks she calls twice. She brought the kids over last month and we made bannock together in the kitchen, a recipe her mother used to make, and my grandson got flour on the dog and everyone laughed. It was an ordinary afternoon. It was the best afternoon I'd had in years. Her husband and I are not warm. I think that's honest. We are civil, and we manage. And at Christmas we sat at the same table and talked about hockey and the weather, and did not talk about houses or transitions or quality of life. That is enough for now. Maybe it becomes more. Maybe it doesn't. I've stopped needing it to be something it isn't. Beverly got a letter from Martin in September. She called the number on the letterhead to make sure it was real. Martin confirmed it was. She called me after that. I had left my number with Martin's office in case she wanted to reach out, and she said she didn't know what to say. I told her she'd already said the important thing, back in that hospital room on day 4. She laughed. She had a good laugh. She said she hoped I was taking better care of myself. I told her I was working on it. Gord got the executor paperwork and called me to say I was out of my mind, and that he didn't know the first thing about being an executor. I told him Martin would walk him through everything, that it wasn't complicated, and that I trusted him because he was the person who rode in the ambulance when he didn't have to. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, gruffly, the way men his age say things they actually mean, "All right, fine. My grandchildren have a trust in their names. It kicks in when each of them turns 25 for education or a first home or starting a business. Their choice, no conditions beyond that. I hope by the time they're 25 they know where it came from and what it cost. I hope they never need to understand it the way I understand it now. As for me, I still live on Lorne Street. The hip is still bad. I finally made the appointment, and they're talking about a replacement sometime in the spring, which I am not looking forward to. The driveway still needs scraping in February. I do it more carefully now, slower, one section at a time. Sandra used to say that the people who show up for you in the hard moments are telling you something true. She meant it as a comfort, the way she meant most things, but it cuts both ways, and I think she knew that too. You find out who people are when you're flat on your back in the cold. You find out who shows up and who calculates the drive time. You find out who sits in an empty chair and tells you to call your lawyer. I'm 68 years old. I had a heart attack in my driveway in February. I lost a month I'll never get back, and I gained a clarity I wouldn't trade for anything. Some lessons come easy. This one didn't. But I'm grateful for it now. And that, I suppose, is the most honest thing I can tell you. There's something about lying on frozen ground in February that strips away every story you've been telling yourself. I'd spent years telling myself a comfortable one. That I was a generous father. That the money I gave was freely given and freely received. That my daughter's distance was just life. Busy schedules, young kids, the usual. I told myself that love didn't need to be demonstrated in hospitals or ambulances. That it was there underneath everything, even when you couldn't see it. The driveway on Lorne Street showed me what was actually underneath, what I've come to understand. Slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something is that the way a story ends is almost never a surprise if you're honest about how it began. I taught my son-in-law, without meaning to, that I was a resource. Every time I said yes when I should have said nothing, every time I absorbed a financial problem that wasn't mine to absorb, I was writing the same sentence over and over. I am here to be used. He read it clearly. I'm the one who took years to read it myself. That's the part that took the most honesty to sit with. Not what he did, what I allowed. There's a difference between being kind and being unwilling to disappoint people. And I had spent a long time calling the second thing by the first thing's name, real integrity. The kind that actually protects the people you love, including yourself, requires you to be clear about what you will and won't accept. Not out of coldness, out of respect. For them and for yourself. Beverly understood this instinctively. She'd been a nurse for decades, which means she'd watched hundreds of people face the worst moments of their lives, and she'd learned to cut through to what mattered. She didn't comfort me with vague reassurances. She asked me if I had a lawyer. That question was an act of clear-eyed care, the kind that requires you to see a situation accurately before you can actually help. I think about that a lot, how much damage gets done in the name of kindness when we look away from what's true because the truth is uncomfortable. Beverly looked directly at it. That's its own kind of wisdom. And then there's Gord. He didn't do anything dramatic, he just showed up, every day with 2 large doubles and a maple dip. And he sat in the chair that nobody else was sitting in. That takes something quiet, but not small. The willingness to keep showing up even when it's inconvenient, even when there's no obvious reward, even when the person in the hospital bed is just a neighbor you've known for years and not a blood relation. That kind of steadiness doesn't announce itself. It just appears when it's needed, consistently, without being asked twice. I think about what the last 7 months have cost all of us and what they've given back. My daughter calls every week now. My grandchildren got flour on the dog and everyone laughed. These are not small things. They happened because I stopped pretending, because I was willing to say out loud what was true, even though the conversation was one of the hardest I've ever had. You don't get the real relationship without the real conversation. That's the part I wish I'd understood 20 years earlier. I'm 68. The hip replacement is booked for spring. The driveway still needs scraping. I'm taking it one section at a time.